Hello and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter, and I'm here with a show that I call Shelve, Store, or Sell. It's exactly what the name disclaims. I'm going through 140 short boxes worth of stored comics, some of which I haven't seen since 2017, and deciding what of those three things are we going to do with them. I only have about a little under 20 blocks of these shelves that I can still fill behind me, and so I've got to be a little bit discerning in my decisions, which we haven't really seen me be so far. This box, it's box number 1058, and it's labeled Marvel Shelved A through E. So if this show is Shelve, Store, or Sell, what does it mean that this box is labeled Shelved? Well, I used to have a 4x4 shelf like this in my old house back in the States, and it was full to the brim. It even had things across the top, and everything was double deep, and it was pretty much my whole comic collection for a while. Then I started getting into singles. Then I wanted to start collecting Avengers too. Then I wanted to have everything from 2000 forward. I was still doing okay. Then Epic collections happened. And when the Epic collections happened, in addition to all these other things, those shelves weren't enough, and that's how we graduated into these boxes. So this box has stuff that at some point I thought was worth shelving, but I don't know if that's gonna be the case anymore, and let's just dig right in. Wow, big hunks of stuff. So this big hunk of stuff is Astonishing X-Men. It's all of the Astonishing X-Men that came after Joss Whedon and John Cassaday and Laura Martin's original 24 issues plus the giant size run on Astonishing X-Men, which I do have in a couple of different formats. That's actually the book that kind of was the prelude to me getting back into collecting, because I noticed it in the years that I wasn't a comic reader, and I knew who Joss Whedon was, and I picked it up and it was charming, and then I started buying the trades, and that's how I kind of became aware of this whole world again. And look at what a great customer lifetime value I have now for Marvel and for comic publishers in general. These books that pull people back into the medium really, really count. So I was excited to continue Astonishing X-Men, and I've read every page of these, some of them multiple times. And what Astonishing X-Men started out as, after that, in the wake of Joss Whedon, was Warren Ellis took over. And Warren Ellis is a pretty big name. You know, he had just come from doing Planetary, he had done Next Wave, and so people were really excited to be like, wow, Warren Ellis on X-Men. Of course, one of his very first American comics titles was Excalibur back in the 90s, and that's where my love of Warren Ellis originated. So he came and he did this arc called Ghost Box. And Ghost Box, I have come to realize over the years, is a very, it's a very divisive X-Men book for a couple of reasons. One, because Ellis tells this very layered, murky story. It doesn't really have real heroes, and the X-Men don't really get to win so much as they, you know, fix a situation, but there's no real winner, and that's always hard for some fans to absorb. Also, it's kind of hard to follow for a while. I remember reading the first issue of this, and there's this scene where this man has been set on fire, and they go to investigate it, and we're trying to figure out what happened that caused him to be set on fire. And I remember reading it and rereading it and really struggling to understand everything that was happening in it. So it's very dense for a X-Men comic book. And then there's this artwork. Now, I love Simone Bianchi. He's one of my favorite artists, and I think he was much cleaner at this point. He's gotten a little murkier since then, but he does this very painterly style. He plays with very kind of strange panel shapes, and I'm a fan. And when I first, I love this page of Scott and Emma in bed, and they're centered on the circular bed on the page, and then the page, it mimics panel breakups, but it's not actually a panel, it's really just an overhead view. I love this stuff. And so for me, it was all three of those things, you know, a situation with no clear winner, a dense comic book, and a comic with very painterly, unusual panel layouts. They're all up my alley. So I read and reread and reread and reread this, and I'm obsessed with it. I love it. If it came out in oversized hardcover, I would be the first person in line to buy it. In fact, I think I originally had a trade paperback, and I upgraded to hardcover because I wanted something that was a little bit more lasting. But people weren't really into it. And so then there was this follow-on Exogenic, which had art by Jimenez. Which Jimenez is that? Phil Jimenez, which was like one of the best artists working, and certainly was 10 years ago when this came out. And this one, again, it was just not like the most exciting X-Men story. And then I think what happened is there was going to be a third arc, and it just got turned into this mini series because I don't know why. I'm sure like Xavier Files or somebody who knows this could really tell you. So here's the thing. Should you read these? And do I care to have them on my shelf? I say yes. Like, I love Warren Ellis. I have so much other Ellis stuff on my shelf. And I think this really still held up the case that Astonishing X-Men was like the prestige X-Men title. It was the title for people to come from other places, come in and tell big, cool, brainy stories, and then leave. And I really wish we could have maintained it in that sense, the way that sometimes DC will have like all-star something, or have more of like kind of anthology related book. I just feel like X-Men deserves that. And X-Men weirdly doesn't tend to attract these really big name creators to it to play in the sandbox unless they're gonna come and be in charge of the whole sandbox. And I think having a title where they're encouraged to just do an arc or two and then leave is really positive. So I do think I would put that on my shelf. What's weird is that we don't really have anything that new on the shelves yet. Like, we don't have any year 2008 or 2010 stuff. So I don't really know how that's gonna fit into this whole thing, but I do really love it. But here's the thing. After that, we got a split run by Christos Gage and Daniel Way. They alternated issues, but then they collected them into 2 separate trades, and it was just boring as heck. And these are 2 people, I mean, I really like Christos Gage. I think he's done a lot of really good stuff. I think he's a very reliable author to bring in for a very like solid character-focused run, but these were not big names, and Daniel Way was disliked at that point. He had just come off of the Deadpool run that people were like really over it, and nobody at the time except for me liked Wolverine Origins, and so he was not a fan favorite, and there was kind of this sense of like, why does this title exist? It sort of still felt like it was a Cyclops and Wolverine showcase plus armor, and like, is that enough to justify having a whole book that's another adjective of X-Men? I don't know, unless I'm doing a complete sequential read, that I'm ever going to come back and reread these. They just weren't very good stories. So then Greg Pak comes along and writes, and writes an arc with McCone that introduces what will eventually become Greg Pak's basis for his Extreme X-Men, which features Dazzler. And so this is really like Extreme X-Men Volume 0. It's a fine story, but again, Pak, fine, great author, doesn't really fulfill that MO for me that Whedon or Ellis does of being like an outsider who comes in to shake things up. But I do like this. I think if I shelve Extreme X-Men, which I probably will because it's Dazzler, I would want to shelve this because it's the kind of the intro to that story, but until that point, I don't really see the point. So then they stopped releasing hardcovers, and we go into Marjorie Liu's run, which is volume 10, 11, 12, and then this final story, Extermination. So Marjorie Liu, weirdly, does fit the MO for me because she's a famous author. She really hadn't done a ton of Marvel comic works at that point. She'd done Black Widow, I think, at that point, and she had maybe was in X-23 at the same time as this run, but she was still much more famous for being an author. You know, this was before Monstrous came out. So to me, I kind of felt like, oh great, we're finally back to a prestige book. And then she wrote this really great X-Men as Family. She started out with North Star's Wedding, which actually is in oversized hardcover, but then they didn't do a normal size hardcover, so I downgraded it to a trade paperback. And then she really focused on Karma, who is this character who had never really had a good story for years and years and years, other than losing her leg in Second Coming, and this just gave her some depth and purpose. And then she did this great final arc where she found a great story for Gambit and Wolverine. She found a great story for Iceman. It started to become the comic that you could rely on for like great character study type of X-Men stuff. And she was using people who weren't getting attention elsewhere, like North Star and like Warbird. And then of course that had to end because basically we're coming up against Marvel now and they had to close down all of these smaller books. So there was this thing called Extermination, and it shut down Age of Apocalypse, Astonishing X-Men, and Extreme X-Men. Although actually Astonishing X-Men went on for another 7 issues, which is collected in here. So these books kind of like go into one of their... I really love this run. It's as weird as it is from a completionist standpoint to shelf this and not the ones in between. It kind of works for me because that's the whole point. I want the Astonishing X-Men stuff on my shelf that feels like it's really meets that MO of important creators doing great X-Men stories, and those are the ones that do, and these don't. So I think they're gonna go back in the box. That was a lot of talk about Astonishing X-Men. Well, let's say maybe we could get like halfway into this box. That seems fair, right? So this is fun. This is an example. A lot of the shelved stuff is going to be X-Men. So this is Cable and Wolverine, Guts and Glory. It's by Joe Casey, who wrote a lot of Cable in the mid 2 digits of Cable. And this was an original graphic novel, an OGN, although it's kind of just like an annual. They did this a lot for Wolverine at the time, these kind of like $4 or $5, they're square bound annuals. And Stephen Platt, who was really kind of a big deal. He had been on the end of the Moon Knight volume, this Mark Spector Moon Knight volume, and he got really hot, and then he left Marvel, and I think he did some Image stuff and kind of like fizzled, and he doesn't have a whole ton of work that I can think of. So it's kind of fun that this is by Stephen Platt. It's on matte paper. I would have expected it's from 1999. I would have imagined it would be on glossy paper. And this inserts a story for Cable, I think before we officially meet him in New Mutants, when Louise Stevenson and Rob Liefeld introduce him, but it inserts that he would have met Wolverine prior to that. And so I've never read it actually, but I got it because it wasn't collected. Maybe it's been collected since then. I'm actually not actually sure if it's been collected or not since then. Maybe in like a Wolverine Epic collection or something. But I got it to put at the beginning of my Cable chronology, because if you're reading chronological Cable, it's the story that I think directly precedes his arrival. And I think that should probably be covered in my Cable guide, which I will put in the description below. I have a complete guide to Cable's complete chronology. Does this need to be on the shelf? I don't know. So then we have this this older, I don't know. So this is a really cool one of these books that Marvel does where they collected a bunch of disparate stuff that's one topic. I really like when they do that. They recently did it for like Tigra. And it's annoying if you're just collecting all of the things in Epic or in other collections, because you're like, I don't need this like $30 book, $40 book that's a bunch of scattered single issues of Tigra. But if you love Tigra and you haven't been collecting all that stuff, that's great. So this X-Men, The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix pretty much wraps up all of the future stuff that involved Cable's youth. So it has The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, which is where Jean Grey and Scott wind up on their honeymoon. It has Scani's Son, which is a follow-up to that. It has X-Men Phoenix, which was a miniseries for Rachel Summers as Phoenix. And then it has Books of Ascani, which has some of that future stuff as well. What it doesn't have is the Mr. Sinister-focused further adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix when they travel in time again, but they travel back, because that didn't have anything to do with Cable. So I understand now why these two things were in this bag, because this represents pretty much the full prehistory of Cable. Now, I like a lot of those series because I like the future adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. That was very much Slim and Red, as they are in the future. That was very much my like collecting prime, and I really like anything with Rachel Summers. I'm a sucker for anything with Rachel Summers. But I don't really feel like I have a coherent plan for like what that kind of historical X-Men stuff is going to look like on the shelf yet. And looking through this doesn't have all of the Cable books that I know to exist now. A lot of them came out in the past 3 years, so I've got them since I've been here, and I don't know what boxes they're in. So I'm not like ready for, I don't have a strategy yet for shelving Cable. So that actually encompasses this as well. There's 3, I'm not even going to open this bag, there's 3 volumes of Cable Classic, which was what they used to do before there were Epic collections to try to proceed chronologically through a series. They leave off, I want to say, around issue 32. I guess we are going to open the bag. And then Marvel continued kind of unlabeled trade paperbacks after that. Yeah, oh, only through 20. I must be thinking of one of those trade paperbacks that came after that. And so and then I have these 2 things here, which are the very end of Cable's run before it turned into Soldier X. Cable went from 97 to 107 with a very different feel. This doesn't really look or feel X-Men-y. It's kind of getting around the time of New X-Men. It was written by David Tishman, whoever that is. Sorry, David Tishman, I don't know who you are. And at one point illustrated by Igor Kordy, and it's just a very different kind of looking book. I've never read these, and they actually, I think they did an OHC of this that's just called Cable Soldier X, which came out in the last couple of years, and I didn't get it because I'm like, are they ever going to do all the rest of Cable and oversized hardcover? Because if not, why am I getting this one book? I really, as my collection has grown, I've really gotten a lot more restrictive about like, why am I buying this one-off in this format that's never going to get continued? So they're going to go back in the box until I find those other Cable books, and maybe then we'll get this box back out. Then we have the 4 volumes of Cable from his 2000 and what is this? 2008 to 2010 series, so basically bridges from the end of Messiah Complex when he takes off with Hope until when he and Hope get back to the present day, the beginning of Second Coming, and it crosses through Messiah War in the middle. Unfortunately, X-Force, at the same time by Kyle and Yost, have gotten oversized hardcovers, and they're beautiful, and they line up really nicely on the shelf with the Messiah War and the Second Coming oversized hardcovers as well. Cable's never got that upgrade, and they pretty recently went back to recollect this in bigger trade paperbacks, so I don't know if we're ever going to get it in an oversized hardcover. And to me, that part of my X-Men collection, that whole like Messiah period, is an oversized hardcover period. So I kind of feel like why would I put this on the shelf? Again, unless I'm going to go in on this idea of having a complete Cable run on the shelf, like why would it be on the shelf? So I think it's gone back in the box. But this is a really good indication that on my old shelves, pretty much if it was X-Men, it was on the shelves. Like there was no question that it was going to go on the shelves. Whereas here, as much as I still love X-Men, I just feel like I have so much more of a collection to showcase and to reference, and I'm not just reading X-Men, I'm picking up all of these things off the shelf all the time to reference things or read a couple of issues. So and I've read these predominantly, so I just don't see the need to put them on the shelf. So that's half of this box, A through E. We got through C, and there's D and into E in here, and we'll just continue that on the next episode. So thanks so much for watching. I'm super interested to hear what you think of these books. Would you put them on the shelf? Have you read them? Do you want to read them because of what I said? Could I have said something different? We're still pretty early in this process of figuring out what I'm talking about on these shows. And leave those comments below. If you want to see more of this, I'm hoping that it's going to continue to be a regular series with your support, so like and subscribe. And I've been Peter, and this has been Crushing Comics.